The air inside the Cook County Courthouse in November 1992 is heavy with the scent of floor wax and the collective breath of 100 onlookers. Outside, a biting Chicago wind rattles the window panes, but inside, the silence is absolute. Savannah Reed sits at the defense table, her fingers tracing the wood grain of the desk. A year ago, she was the girl on the posters, the golden child of Oak Creek, Illinois. Today, she is a headline. The prosecutor stands, holding a single piece of evidence, a silk prom sash, stained and discarded. He doesn't start with the crime, he starts with the crown. This is the autopsy of a perfect life, a story of how a suburban dream became a house of horrors. Welcome to the Justice Minute. Before we uncover the truth behind the Reed family, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. If you are new here and believe that every story deserves to be told with depth and honesty, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. We are committed to exploring the cases that define our history. To understand the tragedy of 1992, one must understand the environment of Oak Creek. It was a town where wealth was a shield and reputation was a religion. Thomas and Martha Reed were the high priests of this society. Thomas was a corporate lawyer with a reputation for being a shark, a man who viewed his family as a brand to be managed. Martha was the social glue of the community, a woman obsessed with the optics of her charity galas and the precise height of her hedges. Then there was Savannah. In the spring of 1991, she was the most popular girl at West High. She was the captain of the cheerleading squad and a straight-A student. She was the girl who had everything, or so it seemed to the kids who watched her pull into the school parking lot in her white Volkswagen cabriolet, the radio blasting the latest alternative hits. But in June of that year, the brand was threatened. Savannah discovered she was pregnant. In the Reed household, a scandal was worse than a death sentence. The summer of 1991 became a blur of whispered arguments and closed doors. By August, the neighbors were told Savannah had been accepted into an elite leadership academy in Wisconsin. The reality was a private, secluded medical facility. Savannah was hidden away, her existence scrubbed from the local social calendar. On August 24th, 1991, she gave birth to a boy she named Leo. For 2 weeks, she held him in the quiet of that room, believing she had finally found something that belonged to her. But Thomas Reed had other plans. He arrived with legal papers and an ultimatum. He told her the baby was being placed in a closed adoption and that she was to return home and resume her life as if nothing had happened. He told her he was saving her future. Savannah signed the papers under duress, believing her son was going to a better life. She didn't know then that her father was already weaving a web of lies that would take over a year to unravel. When Savannah returned to Oak Creek for her senior year in the fall of 1991, she was a shadow. She wore the flannel shirts and oversized sweaters of the era, trying to disappear even while standing at the center of the cheering section. Her friends noticed she was distant, often staring into space during parties. Behind the scenes, she was spiraling. She spent her nights driving to Wisconsin, sitting in the parking lot of the facility where she last saw Leo. She began calling adoption agencies, desperate for a lead. When Thomas found out, the house became a war zone. He threatened to have her committed. He told her Leo was gone and forgotten. In response, Savannah stopped fighting. She put on the mask of the perfect daughter. She joined the prom committee. She smiled for the cameras. Thomas and Martha thought they had won. They thought the problem had been managed. What time is it there as you listen to this? Imagine the weight of a secret that large, held behind a smile that has to stay perfect for the cameras. This story is a reminder that the most polished surfaces often hide the deepest cracks. If you are finding this investigation compelling, please hit that like button to help others find this story. As the winter of 1992 turned into spring, the pressure inside the Reed mansion reached a fever pitch. Savannah was no longer just a grieving mother. She had become a detective in her own home. She began watching her father's movements, noting the late-night phone calls and the way he locked his study door. She realized that for a man who valued truth and order, Thomas Reed was acting like a man with something to hide. She began to suspect that the closed adoption wasn't as simple as he had claimed. The night of the prom was fast approaching, and the town of Oak Creek was obsessed with the details. Who would win the crown? What would Savannah wear? To the outside world, she was the frontrunner for royalty. To Savannah, the prom was a deadline. She knew that once she graduated and left for college, her access to her father's files and any hope of finding Leo would vanish. She had to act. In the week leading up to the dance, while her mother was busy coordinating the floral arrangements for the post-prom brunch, Savannah found the key to the wall safe, hidden inside a hollowed-out legal tome in her father's library. She didn't find adoption papers. She found a ledger of cash payments. The date started in August of 1991 and continued every 2 weeks through May of 1992. The recipient wasn't an agency. It was a woman named Beverly Vance. Savannah stared at the numbers, her heart hammering against her ribs. If the baby had been adopted, why was her father still paying for him? And why were the payments so high? She realized in that cold, quiet library that her parents hadn't just given her child away, they had hidden him. They had kept him within reach, but out of her sight, like a piece of property they weren't yet ready to sell. But as she scrolled further down the ledger, she saw a note scribbled in the margin for the month of April. It was her father's handwriting, jagged and sharp. It simply said, "Vance not responding. Trace location." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her parents hadn't just lied about the adoption, they had lost control of the situation. Her son was out there, somewhere, with a woman her father could no longer find. And yet, they were still planning her prom coronation as if their world wasn't collapsing. Savannah, standing in her bedroom on the night of the prom, wearing her white silk dress and holding the stolen ledger, looks in the mirror, but she doesn't see a queen. She sees a woman who has been robbed of her child and her reality. The stage is set for the most violent night in Oak Creek history. The night of May 16th, 1992, began with the kind of cinematic perfection that Thomas Reed demanded. The driveway of the mansion was lined with luxury cars, and the flashbulbs of cameras popped as Savannah stepped out in her white silk gown. To the neighbors watching from their porches, it looked like the climax of a teen movie. But underneath the layers of tulle and hairspray, Savannah was carrying the stolen ledger. She had tucked the folded pages into her clutch bag, right next to her lipstick. Every time she smiled for a photo, she felt the weight of those numbers against her palm. She wasn't going to a dance. She was going to a coronation that she intended to turn into an execution of her parents' lies. The high school gymnasium was transformed into a Midnight in Paris theme, filled with the scent of cheap cologne and expensive lilies. The music of 1992 echoed off the bleachers The Cure, Boys to Men, and Red Hot Chili Peppers. Savannah moved through the crowd like a sleepwalker. She danced when she was told to dance. She laughed when her friends cracked jokes about graduation, but her eyes were constantly drifting to the exit. She kept thinking about the name in the ledger, Beverly Vance. She kept thinking about the note in the margin that said, "Not responding." While her classmates were worrying about their college placements, Savannah was calculating how much time she had left before her father noticed the safe had been breached. What time is it there as you listen to this? In the quiet moments of 1992, before everyone had a telephone in their pocket, a silence could be a dangerous thing. It allowed secrets to fester. If you are captivated by the tension of this suburban tragedy, please hit that like button. It helps our channel grow and allows us to bring more of these deep dive narratives to light. At 11 o'clock, the principal took the stage. The drum roll began. When Savannah's name was announced as prom queen, the room erupted. Mark, her date, led her to the center of the floor. The plastic gems of the tiara were placed on her head, reflecting the disco ball's light. In the official school video, Savannah looks radiant. But if you look closely at the archival footage, you can see her hands are shaking so violently that she has to grip her bouquet just to keep from dropping it. She wasn't thinking about the crown. She was thinking about the empty nursery in her heart. The incident began at 2 in the morning. Savannah returned home alone. She had told Mark she had a headache and wanted to beat the post-prom traffic. The mansion was dark, save for the green glow of the security system and the light spilling out from under the door of her father's study. Savannah didn't go to her room to take off her dress. She walked straight to the study. She found Thomas Reed sitting in his leather chair, a glass of scotch in his hand, staring at the open-wall safe. He didn't look surprised. He looked disappointed. "You shouldn't have gone in there, Savannah," he said. His voice was flat, the sound of a man who had already decided how to handle a problem. Savannah didn't flinch. She pulled the ledger from her bag and threw it on the desk. She demanded to know where Leo was. She demanded to know who Beverly Vance was. Martha Reed entered the room then, wearing a silk robe, her face a mask of disappointment. Martha didn't offer comfort. She told Savannah that they had done everything for her. She told her that Beverly Vance was a necessary precaution, and that if the woman had disappeared, it was Savannah's fault for being a distraction. The argument that followed was a collision of 19 years of repressed rage. Savannah realized in those moments that her parents didn't just want the baby gone. They had used the child as a leash. They had kept him nearby to ensure Savannah stayed in line, but they had been so arrogant that they had let a professional criminal walk away with him. Thomas laughed when Savannah threatened to call the police. He reminded her that he was the law in Oak Creek. He told her she was an ungrateful girl who was about to lose everything, her college fund, her car, and her reputation. He told her that as far as the world was concerned, Leo never existed, and if she kept talking, she wouldn't exist either. Where are you watching from? The next few minutes of this story are what changed Oak Creek forever. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Justice Minute. We are uncovering the truth, one layer at a time. Savannah didn't scream. She didn't cry. She reached for the heavy brass trophy on the mantel, an award Thomas had won for a landmark corporate case. The first blow caught him across the temple before he could stand up. Martha screamed and lunged for the telephone, but the cord was ripped from the wall. In the quiet hours of that 1992 morning, the perfect Reed family was dismantled in the very room where their fortune had been managed. Savannah didn't leave the house. She didn't call for help. She sat on the floor in her prom dress, the white silk turning a deep, dark crimson, and she waited. When the police arrived at 4 in the morning, alerted by a neighbor who heard the commotion, they found Savannah sitting at the dining room table. She had the tiara on her head. She was staring at a photograph of a baby that she had taken from her father's desk. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like a mother who had finally run out of things to lose. The officer who handcuffed her would later testify that she only said one thing over and over again. They lost him. They lost my boy. The golden girl was gone, and the search for the truth about Beverly Vance and the missing child was about to become a national obsession. As the sun rose over Oak Creek on May 17, 1992, the illusion of suburban safety evaporated. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, cordoning off the Reed mansion. Detectives moved through the house with heavy footfalls, their flashlights illuminating the remnants of a life built on lies. They found the white silk dress discarded in the hallway, a ghostly shell of the girl who had been crowned queen just hours before. The investigation was not a search for a suspect. Savannah had stayed at the scene, but a search for a motive. Why would the girl who had everything throw it all away in a single night of rage? The local news stations were the first to arrive, their bulky cameras perched on shoulders, capturing the image of Savannah being led out in a baggy sweatshirt, her face pale and devoid of emotion. The narrative in the press was immediate and unforgiving. They called her a spoiled socialite, a cold-blooded prom queen, and a product of a generation that didn't understand the value of life. But inside the interrogation room, the story was shifting. Savannah wasn't talking about herself. She was talking about a woman named Beverly Vance and a baby boy named Leo. The 1992 legal system was a different world, one where DNA was a whisper and paper trails were the only map to the truth. If you are captivated by the way these hidden layers are being peeled back, please hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that deep-dive storytelling still matters. By the time the trial began in October 1992, the defense had uncovered the caretaker account. Savannah's lawyer, a man who specialized in the dark corners of family law, presented a series of wire transfers that made the gallery gasp. Thomas Reed hadn't just been paying Beverly Vance, he had been funding an entire shadow existence. The courtroom was hushed as the defense played a microcassette recording found in the Reed safe. It was a phone call from April. In it, Martha Reed's voice is heard trembling, not with grief, but with fury. She tells Beverly, "If you lose that child, you lose your life. We didn't pay you to be careless. We paid you to be a vault." The revelation that the adoption was a lie turned the trial on its head. The jury, comprised of ordinary people from neighboring towns, watched as the image of the victims began to rot. Thomas and Martha weren't just parents, they were jailers. The defense argued that Savannah had been a victim of gaslighting, a term that was just beginning to find its way into the public consciousness. She had been told her child was gone to a better home, only to discover he was being held like a bargaining chip by a professional fixer. What's the weather like today where you are? In that Chicago courtroom, it felt like the air was freezing over as the final piece of evidence was introduced. A neighbor of Beverly Vance testified that in late April, she saw the woman packing a car in the middle of the night. There was a baby in the back seat. Beverly had looked terrified, glancing over her shoulder as if she were being hunted. She disappeared into the 1992 landscape, a world without GPS or digital footprints. She had the money, she had the child, and she had the leverage. The insane twist that left the courtroom in stunned silence occurred during the cross-examination of the Reed's former housekeeper. She admitted that she had overheard Thomas Reed talking to a private investigator 2 days before the prom. He knew Beverly was gone. He knew the child was missing. But he told the investigator to wait until after the graduation parties to start the search. He didn't want the police at his door while the champagne was being poured. He was willing to let his grandson remain in the hands of a fugitive just to ensure the neighbors didn't see a flaw in the Reed facade. This case challenges everything we think we know about good families. If you believe that reputation should never come before a human life, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In 1992, the laws on diminished capacity were rigid. Despite the horror of her parents' actions, Savannah had taken 2 lives. When the verdict of guilty was read, Savannah didn't flinch. She looked toward the back of the courtroom, at the empty seats where her family should have been. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. As she was led away, the plastic tiara from the prom, which had been entered into evidence, sat on the clerk's desk, its fake diamonds reflecting the cold overhead lights. The mystery of baby Leo was only beginning. The trial had provided a motive, but it hadn't provided a location. The hunt for the ghost of 1992 was about to go international. The years following the trial of 1992 were a slow erosion of the Reed family legacy. The mansion was sold at auction, its grand hallways emptied of the expensive furniture that had witnessed such a quiet, calculated cruelty. While the world moved on to the digital age, Savannah Reed became a fixture of the Illinois correctional system. She didn't seek appeals. She didn't grant interviews. She spent her time in the prison woodshop, carving small wooden blocks that she would never get to give to a son who existed only in her memories. But the ghost of Leo wouldn't stay buried. In the late 90s, a journalist named Marcus Thorne began a series of reports on the lost children of the elite. He was fascinated by Beverly Vance, the woman who had vanished into the ether of 1992. Marcus didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in money. He spent 3 years tracking the financial ripples of the Reed estate, and in 1998, he found a final, untraceable payment. It wasn't a bank transfer. It was a cash withdrawal of $50,000 made by Martha Reed just 48 hours after the murders. Where are you watching from as we reach the final truth? The search for justice often takes a lifetime. If you have stayed with us this far, please Hit that like button. Your support allows us to tell the stories that time almost forgot. What time is it there? As Marcus Thorne followed the money, it led him to a small airfield in Gary, Indiana. The pilot was a man named Arthur Vance, no relation to Beverly, but a man who knew how to keep a secret for the right price. In 1999, facing a terminal diagnosis, Arthur decided to clear his conscience. He revealed that on the night of the prom, he had been hired for a mercy flight. He had flown a woman and an infant across the border into a remote part of Ontario, Canada. But the woman wasn't Beverly Vance. It was Martha Reed's younger sister, a woman the family had institutionalized and then ignored for decades. This was the first layer of the final betrayal. Martha hadn't just lost the baby to a caretaker. She had orchestrated a second disappearance to ensure Savannah could never reclaim him. They wanted the child out of the country, out of the bloodline, and out of the history books. But as Marcus Thorne tracked down the aunt in Canada, the story took its most insane turn. The aunt was living in a small cabin, raising a boy who was now 7 years old. He had the Reed eyes and the Reed chin. But when Marcus Thorne secured a DNA sample, the results shattered everything. The boy was not Leo. He was the biological child of Thomas Reed, and a mistress he had kept for years in Chicago. The secret child, Savannah had been told was hers, was actually her half-brother. What's the weather like today where you are? The coldness of the Reed family reaches across decades. In a final, desperate act of image preservation, Thomas and Martha had used Savannah's pregnancy as a smokescreen. They had switched the infants at the Wisconsin facility. They gave Savannah's real son to a working-class family in Southside Chicago, telling the facility that the adoption had already been handled privately. They then took Thomas's illegitimate son and placed him with Beverly Vance, intending to adopt him back into the family later as a way to explain his presence without admitting to Thomas's infidelity. Savannah had killed for a child she thought was hers, only to find out she had been a pawn in her father's larger game of ego. Her real son, the true Leo, had grown up just 30 miles away from her prison cell. He was a high school athlete, a boy who knew nothing of the prom queen, the mansion, or the blood spilled in 1992. He had been raised with love by a family who didn't care about reputations or ledgers. The final scene of the documentary takes us back to the prison in the present day. Savannah is shown a photograph of a man in his 30s. He has her smile, he has her kindness, but he is a stranger. She looks at the photo for a long time, her hands now aged and scarred from years of prison labor, trembling just as they did on the night she was crowned queen. She doesn't ask to meet him. She knows that some truths are too heavy to carry. She simply tucks the photo into her pocket, next to the plastic ring she has kept for over 30 years. The crown of 1992 was never made of gold. It was a crown of ashes. Savannah Reed remains behind bars, a reminder of what happens when a family values the image of a life more than the life itself. Thank you for joining us for this investigation on the Justice Minute. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. Share this story with someone who remembers the headlines. Was justice served, or was the real crime committed long before the first blow was struck? Let us know in the comments. We will see you in the next Minute of Justice.